Hello, I'm Dr. Barbara Natterson-Horowitz, and I'm delighted to be talking to you today about species-spanning medicine, improving the health of humans, animals, and the planet we share. So I would submit that evolutionary biology and animal science, veterinary science, is as foundational to human medicine as mathematics is to architecture or engineering. And that by learning some basic principles of evolutionary biology and learning about animal physiology, we can deepen our understanding of why we get sick, that is our vulnerability to disease, and accelerate biomedical innovation in our approaches to diagnosis, treatment, and prevention. So those are really big claims, and I'm only going to talk with you for about 30 minutes. So here's the plan. I'll quickly share with you my own journey, talk about some of the ways in which looking at evolutionarily and across species can increase our insights into the causes of cardiovascular disease, give you an example of how this approach can actually enhance our understanding of adolescence and young adult transitions, and then talk about the future, some ideas I have for the future. So my journey. So I was a cardiologist at UCLA. I was a professor of medicine and cardiology for over 20 years, taking care of human patients with, heart attacks and high cholesterol and hypertension. I had expertise in cardiovascular imaging, and I was working with our arrhythmia group. And then one day I got a telephone call that literally changed my life. The call came from one of the veterinarians at the Los Angeles Zoo. One of their chimpanzees had symptoms that they thought were neurological, and they asked if I'd come and do a transesophageal echo to look for a cardiac source of emboli. And of course, I'd done this procedure on thousands of human patients, but certainly never before on a non-human animal. And as I know that the veterinarians, the veterinary students are aware, and perhaps the medical students are not, but zoos are staffed by board-certified, incredibly well-trained veterinarians who take superb care of their animal patients. But on occasion, particularly when it comes to the management of great apes and the cardiovascular care of great apes, they do reach into the human community for collaborative assistance. And so I was one of the lucky physicians who got that kind of call. So this is, on the left is UCLA, Ronald Reagan Medical Center, where I work, and this is the LA Zoo, and this is the hospital at the LA Zoo. And the first time I did this procedure, a transesophageal echo on a non-human patient, it was a chimpanzee. And, but several weeks later, I was called to look at the aorta of a gorilla. Aortic dissection, it turns out, is a leading cause of death among Western lowland gorillas in captivity. And eventually, over the course of several years, I imaged and participated in the care of quite a number of their primate patients. They have a pretty large primate collection at the Los Angeles Zoo. And eventually, I graduated beyond primates, and I was really just delighted and extremely honored to participate in the care of a range of animals there. Well, there were three cases that really transformed me the most, and which led to a very dramatic shift in my life, my career. The first was actually this first patient, Pandora. I put the probe down that first day, and this is what I saw. Of course, what I'm looking at and what you're looking at is a four-chambered heart. We see a left ventricle and a right ventricle, a left atrium and a right atrium. And I think you can all appreciate that in the right atrium, there are multiple mobile elements. Those are blood clots. And as I looked at that echo, it reminded me a lot of an echo that I had done on a human patient some months before. And in fact, it turned out that this chimpanzee and human patient had the same form of cardiomyopathy. One day I was at the zoo imaging a primate, and some of the keepers came in with a California condor. And they were holding a wing each, and one had a stethoscope on the thorax. And I listened and I heard a murmur. I heard a systolic murmur. And it turned out this bird had a torn leaflet, a valvular leaflet. Again, common to what we see, of course, in human patients. And finally, this is, I love to show this picture, but basically because it's the best picture that anyone's going to ever take of me. But this is actually Cookie. She was a geriatric lioness at the Los Angeles Zoo. who became progressively short of breath over the course of a period of time and was found to have 700 cc's of fluid in her pericardium with tamponade physiology. And so I put together a team of human cardiologists, anesthesiologists, veterinary cardiologists, and surgeons, and collaboratively we drained the pericardium, created a window, and it was really quite similar to, I'd done this on many human patients. The anatomy, the procedure was, of course, very, very similar, except for that, and that is, I think you can see a paw peeking out from the sheets and the surgical sheets, and then you can see the tail. Well, during this period of time, I started reflecting about the meaning of this experience and how I could use my growing interest and knowledge of the pathology of non-human animals to make my work as a human cardiologist better. That is, what kinds of insights could I gain from the veterinary world that I could apply to my work as a clinician, an investigator, and a teacher? Well, during this period of time, I was lucky to be introduced to a brilliant woman named Catherine Bowers, who was an innovator and animal behaviorist. And for the last over 10 years now, we have worked as a research, teaching, and writing team. And we ended up really deeply studying the opportunity to learn from the animal world about human health. And after many years of research and writing, we published Zubiquity in 2012. And Zubiquity was a book which advanced a species-spanning approach to health. It really takes the position that since the origin of the vulnerability of human beings to disease emerged through an evolutionary context, looking across species, adopting a species-spanning approach, and thinking evolutionarily can really help us understand cancer, heart disease, even psychiatric diseases in our species. We also, this is back in 2010, 2011. During that period of time, we really, and for the years that we were researching the book, although we went to many veterinary conferences and we interviewed veterinarians, we read the veterinary literature, we went to many, many settings, we were surprised that there were so few opportunities for veterinarians and physicians to collaborate. And particularly collaborate around issues that were not zoonoses. And so we founded the Zubiquity conferences. The first Zubiquity conference was at UCLA. This is the handshake that we wanted to see replicated around the world. On the right was the then dean of the UCLA School of Medicine, and on the left was Benny Osborne, the then dean of the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. And I had flown up to UC Davis to, Catherine and I actually flew up together to ask the leadership there whether they would consider being partners with us in a conference which would bring together leaders in human medicine, leaders in veterinary medicine, around cancer, around heart disease, around biobehavioral disorders, around obesity, et cetera, et cetera. And they instantly were nodding their heads absolutely. And we similarly approached the Los Angeles Zoo if they wanted to be partners in this, and instantly said yes. And to this day, I cannot tell you how grateful I feel that there was this collegial openness and the sense that there was an opportunity for collaboration from the veterinary side. So the first two Zubiquity conferences were at UCLA, and UC Davis faculty and students flew down. And then we all went to the Los Angeles Zoo, where the veterinarians took the physicians on rounds, and the vet students sat with the medical students, and we covered a wide range of topics, from atrial fibrillation and dilated cardiomyopathy to breast cancer to self-injury in humans and animals, eating disorders. And since that time, after the first two, Zubiquity conferences have been hosted by cities, veterinary schools, and medical schools around the world. And it's been really a source of tremendous pride to us. And our mission was to bring human and medicine communities together, human and animal medicine communities together, to accelerate biomedical innovation to benefit all life on Earth. And this summer alone, there was a Ubiquity conference in Georgia, and then at actually the Karolinska Institute, the Ubiquity Symposium there kicked off the Nobel Conference, which I keynoted and at which our Ubiquity, our book, was distributed. But the theme of the Nobel Conference this year was about turning to the natural world for insights into health. And it really was a wonderful Ubiquity-inspired convergence of leaders in veterinary medicine and human medicine. So that was really gratifying. Well, Catherine and I have had as our guiding question how insights from animal science and evolutionary biology can be used to improve human health. But we knew we needed to find a way. We needed to find a tool that could help inform us. We ended up using tools from both the field of medicine and evolutionary biology. And one of the major tools that we began using from the world of evolutionary biology was phylogeny. What you're looking at, of course, is a phylogeny. It's a, kind of looks like a family tree. And these are tools, models that evolutionary biologists use to compare species and their characteristics. And you see the trunk of the tree is the common ancestor. I think you all can recognize this. This, of course, is the most famous of all phylogenies. It's the only illustration in The Origin of Species. This is the scribble that Charles Darwin made while he was writing The Origin of Species, years before he published. And one of my favorite things about this illustration is that the genius of the illustrator is exceeded only by his humility. I mean, isn't that great? I think. He's not sure. In any event, we started developing strategies to identify non-human animals in whom so-called human diseases have been reported in the peer-reviewed literature. We essentially did massive systematic reviews to pull out that content and then created phylogenies to organize the information and analyze the information. We developed a phylogeny lab that was dedicated to doing this, and over the course of several years, conducted systematic reviews and built phylogenies, which we interpreted on over 50 conditions, from cardiovascular disease and cancer to biobehavioral disorders and more. And this is, you should recognize this. This is a Prisma diagram as part of a formal systematic review. And you can see some of the conditions that we did systematic reviews and built phylogenies for. Well, once we had our phylogenies, and what you're looking at here, of course, is a phylogeny with the common ancestor over there on the left at about 450 million years. And what you can see from this picture is that there are yellow bars, and each of the yellow bars actually represents a vulnerability to a species or a taxa in whom there's vulnerability to a human disease. And I believe this one was, I think this one was the melanoma one. I can't actually see, the Zoom stuff is blocking it, but this was the idea, where we would see, that this condition was present, or at least had been reported in at least one animal in the non-human literature in a wide range of taxa. And then we would begin a range of analyses to use this information to better understand disease causation and more. Well, here's one of the ways in which we used phylogenies to expand our understanding of disease causation. So there's a pretty common a common condition in human medicine called vasovagal syncope, right? It occurs, in younger patients overall, though not exclusively. And one of the features is that intense emotion, sometimes fear, like getting your blood drawn, can trigger bradycardia, the slowing of the heart. Now, for many years, I taught second-year medical students at UCLA the cardiovascular physiology course, and I would tell them that the slowing of the heart in vasovagal syncope was paradoxical. I said it was paradoxical because, if medical students, to a second-year medical student, it seemed illogical that an individual who was frightened would have a slowing of the heart. Seemed much more logical that there would be an acceleration of the heart. But in fact, we did these phylogenies and began looking at the animals we identified with this characteristic, in this case, fear-induced slowing of the heart. And we began looking at the life histories of those animals to see whether and in what ways this physiology, this fear bradycardia, might be adaptive. Here's one of the life history experiments that guided us. So this is a baby deer, this is a fawn. And if you put telemetry leads on a fawn, an EKG, and you play wolf howls, the EKG, you can see the beats per minute, starts to decelerate. There's a pretty significant deceleration down to here. And interestingly, this is the physiology that you see, a loss of motor tone. It really does appear to have lost consciousness. But the point is that this is tonic immobility. And it turns out across a wide range of animal species, tonic immobility can be an effective way of avoiding predation. Many predators rely on movement. They rely on sound, rustling in the bushes to track prey. And so when an animal becomes completely still, this can be an anti-predation strategy. And what's fascinating is that it seems to be developmentally entrained in non-human animals, in that as animals get older, as deer get older, this becomes less of a response. And as they become more physically able to mount a successful flight, that takes over. So the sympathetic arm becomes more dominant, whereas this parasympathetic vagal response, this bradycardia, is more present when they're younger. Well, what proof do we have that this slowing of the heart might be adaptive, that is, might increase survival and reproduction? So in the moments before a video I'm about to show you, a young cheetah chased and successfully was able to take down a young impala. But as the cheetah was about to enjoy her meal, an older, mature hyena bullied her out of it, intimidated her. And what you're about to see is the cheetah returning, the hyena leaving the impala to chase the cheetah off. But I want you to keep your eye on the impala. And don't worry, it's a little gory in the beginning, but it has a happy ending. So hyena spots cheetah going back. Not going to happen. It's mine now. Keep your eye not on the hyena, but on the impala, and boom. So I can't prove that this particular ungulate was bradycardic and syncopal, but we do know that alarm bradycardia is common in ungulates, particularly younger ungulates, as it is in shorebirds and certain other taxa. And we can certainly see how this would be fitness enhancing, adaptive, increasing survival, and presumably reproductive success. Well, this is a methodology that we've been using for a wide range of disorders in order to develop hypotheses about how our human vulnerability to disease might be adaptive. Disease is not adaptive, but whether the vulnerability to disease is adaptive. And by the way, this approach can also be used when looking at mental health challenges. This is for medical students who are watching, you may not be aware, but there are quite a broad range of biobehavioral disturbances in non-human animals that are quite really correlates of what we see in human patients. This is a tail chasing syndrome. Certain dog breeds have certain kinds of compulsions and stereotypies. And interestingly, this is actually vomiting that is done as a defensive mechanism by birds. There are other species that use a range of vomiting syndromes to deal with social stress and predatory stress. There are models of self-injury in birds, feather plucking, that look a lot like trichotillomania in humans. There's a tremendous amount of phenomenological overlap and a real invitation for us to explore mechanistic linkages between what we are observing and how we can understand it through neurobiology and beyond. So as Catherine and I over the years have been looking for these connections, we similarly were thinking about what our next book would be after Ubiquity. And one of the things that we knew while we were studying mental illness was that there's a phase of life in which there's a lot of vulnerability to developing mental illness, and that's adolescence. If a human being is going to develop major depression, anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, an eating disorder, etc., it's most likely going to happen between the ages of 10 and 25. And we knew that, and we also had been hearing about adolescent animals, informally. And one day we were off of Moss Landing in Northern California on the shore, and we were observing some California sea otter. And the wildlife biologist told us to turn around and look at the ocean. We did. And he said, "That's the triangle of death. You're looking at the triangle of death." We're like, okay, well, what's the triangle of death? So it's a region of ocean that has a greater concentration of great white sharks than any other area in the United States. 40% of all shark bites in the US happen there. And the sea otter, none of them go in there. They know. The marine mammals are very careful. They avoid the triangle of death. Well, all of them do, except for one group, he said. And that group were the adolescents, the adolescent sea otter. They venture in. And we thought that was really interesting, and that kind of got us started on this, this quest to understand animal adolescence. And we did a 5-year study of adolescence in non-human animals, wild animals primarily. And when I look at it now, I say, in a way, it's an example of using One Health approach to understand development. It's One Health for pediatricians. It's One Health for adolescent medicine doctors. It's One Health for the psychotherapists who take care of adolescents. Now, I had actually heard that adolescence was uniquely human. I had heard that adolescence was caused by modern times, but the definition of adolescence is really a mess. The American Academy of Pediatrics has one definition, which differs from the CDC's definition. The neurobiologists say that adolescence continues into the mid-20s because the brain's developing. And my students, I teach a class, Catherine and I teach a class called Coming of Age on Planet Earth to 18 to 22-year-olds, and none of them consider themselves adolescents. So we decided to get rid of definitions of adolescence that were linked to some specific biological phenomenon or to some numerical age, and instead to think about the competencies required to become a mature adult. And so we coined this term wildhood, which is the period of life across species following the onset of puberty, during which time young animals become mature adults, if they're going to become mature adults. And remember, in the wild, many don't. In our species, I think a lot of us know people who are numerical adults who aren't very adult in their behavior, but that's in our species. And what we found was that across the animal kingdom, whether an animal is a deer or a Greenland shark or a puma, there are 4 core competencies that animals need to master in order to be successful, safe, thriving adults. And those are safety, status, self-reliance, and safety, status, sexuality, and self-reliance. And I don't want to get too deeply into that, but we began really looking at adolescence. We traveled around the world. We did field observations, looking for all kinds of aspects of wild animal adolescence. And we taught a course at Harvard called Coming of Age on Planet Earth. And let me just briefly share with you some of the kinds of findings that, again, our methodology, in which we look at a human phenomenon, we try to break it down to identify its smaller elements, find a kernel which we can look for in non-human animals, that is using formal methods of systematic review, and which we can then bring back to our phylogeny lab, create phylogenies, which we then subject to a range of analyses. So let's start with one of the biggest concerns about human adolescence, which is risky behavior. And I think probably everybody knows or has heard that adolescents take risks. And if you'd asked me about risk-taking before I did this study, I would have had some thoughts about it. This is a little sobering, but it's interesting, and I think pediatricians know about this certainly. that if you look at the death rate for 12 to 19-year-olds, you see this really spike upwards, as high as a 7-fold increase. And if you think about this as an evolutionary biologist, you know, a 7-fold increase in pre-reproductive mortality doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is really one of these opportunities to look in a broader way, to move beyond these Homo sapiens centrism that is so characteristic of human medicine, and see whether we can begin to understand human risk-taking through the lens of comparative biology, evolutionary biology, through collaboration with veterinarians, wildlife biologists, and such. So if you'd asked me about risk-taking in teenagers before I did this study, I would have said, well, the reason that adolescents take risks is their brains. They have these, you know, brains that are unique and that are underdeveloped, and, you know, as a consequence, they're risk takers. They get greater, you know, sensation rewards for risk taking. And, you know, I'd read a lot about this, and especially the idea that the prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped in adolescence. And you can see that that's really a lot of the explanation. But we wanted to explore what we could learn about adolescence by looking at animals. And so we did a study, and we asked a question: is mortality increased in non-human adolescent vertebrates? We did a systematic review. It took a long time to find the definitions. What was an animal adolescent? What were we searching? We ended up searching over nearly 1.5 million records. We were able to narrow it down, but ultimately we were able to build a phylogeny of species in whom we definitely were able to establish that mortality was increased when an animal was large enough to leave direct parental supervision, but lacked experience, was big and naive, big and dumb in a way. The wildlife biologists we've worked with call adolescent animals who are on their own for the first time predator naive, and they have a high mortality. Experience helps animals become safer. Inexperience is the source of a lot of safety issues. So this was really exciting for us. And then we ended up looking at the life histories of the animals. We'd identified increased mortality during their adolescence, and we began to look at the behaviors that might contribute to higher mortality and see what we could extract from those to bring back to human life. So one of the things that we learned about adolescent animals is that they are neophilic. They like novelty, and when they disperse, they're inexperienced. They get lost. This is an adolescent koala walking into an Australian electronics store, and this is an adolescent deer walking into a liquor store. I guess adolescents love their electronics and liquor, maybe, I don't know. But the point is that when you hear about an animal who has, a wild animal who's entered into an urban space, very often they are adolescents, very often they're dispersing, and very often they've gotten lost, but it's that neophilia, that interest in novelty, that actually can get them into trouble. And when you hear especially of whales being lost, very often those are, or nearly exclusively, those are adolescents. And this was an adolescent female humpback who got lost in the Ventura Harbor in 2017. So it's quite a, I want to watch that again. Can you believe this? She was lost for hours and hours, and there was a drone photographer who took this video, and I bought some minutes from him, but it goes on for quite a long time. And she eventually does get out. Lots and lots of people tried to help, but she got out on her own. So here's quickly a way in which thinking this way can help us maybe understand human adolescent vulnerability. On the left, you see a mature impala drinking water and spotting the threat, the crop on time. A little trigger warning for what you're about to see. There's a young adolescent who's wandered too far. She's predator naive. She's just inexperienced, and the outcome is not ideal. And interestingly, adolescent animals have, in the wild, we see certain behaviors which look like risk-taking, like kind of knuckle-headed risk-taking, but in fact, And they are risky, but they actually are safety information gaining experiences. So predator inspection is one of them. We did a study where we looked across species for non-human animals who sometimes approached versus ran away from predators. And we found that it existed in Thomson gazelle and mongoose and meerkat, stickleback fish, bats, etc., and birds. Here's an example. This is an adolescent meerkat approaching a Cape cobra. He's going to be joined by his peers, conspecifics. They're smelling, looking, learning about this snake. And this is a predator inspection. It is dangerous. Sometimes there's a bad outcome, but animals who aren't given an opportunity to learn about danger may be in greater danger later. And over here on the right is a group of adolescent Thomson gazelle who are approaching cheetah. Again, adolescent, and see they're coming and they're stopping, and here are the cheetahs. So this is predator inspection. In any event, there are, I could go on and on. It's already 4:57. I'm going to wrap things up, but I want to just point out that that One Health, this approach, our Ubiquity conferences, they're for every part of medicine. When I first started getting interested in the connection between human and veterinary medicine in the mid-2000s, 2005 or 6, One Health was really centered around infectious diseases, zoonoses, emerging, containing emergent pandemic threats, and all of that is extremely and extraordinarily valuable. But there's an equally powerful opportunity across every single field in medicine. And I think this example in pediatrics in development suggests just that. Thank you for listening. I'm delighted that there's a conference between the veterinary and the medical students. One Health is my passion, and finding exciting ways to use the connection and collaboration between human medicine and veterinary medicine and evolutionary biology to deepen how we understand the cause of disease and to accelerate biomedical innovation through collaborative research or evolutionarily and comparatively informed research questions and hypotheses. That's what drives me. It's my passion, and there's so much opportunity. We are at this wonderful moment in time where I really do feel human medicine, which is my field, there's been so much human exceptionalism everywhere. And in medicine, it's taken the form of just unexamined assumptions about the uniqueness of diseases to our species. I think the blindfold of human exceptionalism is being peeled off. And as that happens, connections are being made, patterns are being found, and new questions are being asked, which, as I said before, is not just going to benefit our species, but all of the patients on the planet. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the conference.